The night was a void of starless, bitter cold. A fierce, relentless December wind cut through the air like a blade of chipped ice. Wyatt Calloway, a man whose heart felt as weathered as his leather coat, pulled his thick sheepskin closer, the cold barely registering against the deeper, 3-year-old chill that lived in his bones. Christmas Eve, 11:47 p.m. It was just another night, just another quiet, crushing holiday, marked only by the deafening silence that had become his sole companion. He was heading to his truck for a late-night check on a mare at the ranch, a welcome, practical excuse to escape the 4 sterile walls that felt more like a tomb than the home he'd once planned. But as Wyatt walked toward the curb, something stopped him dead. A slender, fragile figure near the alley, moving slowly, deliberately by the overflowing dumpsters behind the small row of closed shops. Wyatt squinted through the darkness, his breath forming thick white clouds in the frigid air. At first, he feared it was a coyote, but as his eyes adjusted, his heart seized with a shocking, agonizing thump. It was a young man, a teenager, no more than 18, methodically searching through the refuse. His thin fingers were red, trembling violently from the cold, picking through empty food containers and crumpled papers with the terrifying efficiency of someone who had done this before. He was clearly gay, his identity a quiet act of desperate defiance. Even in this desperate moment, a small, tarnished rainbow pin was still affixed to the collar of his tattered, patched-up red sweater, a garment utterly thin and inadequate against the biting, merciless wind. Wyatt's feet moved before his mind had a chance to process the sheer agony of the sight. "Hey there," he called softly, his voice a low, rough baritone, careful not to startle him. The young man's head snapped up. His wide green eyes were instantly filled with a frantic mix of pure terror and raw defiance. He clutched a partially eaten sandwich tightly against his chest, ready to bolt into the shadows. "It's okay," Wyatt said, slowly raising his hands, palms open in a gesture of surrender. "I'm not going to hurt you." The teen remained frozen, studying Wyatt's weathered face from beneath the brim of the cowboy hat. His expression was guarded with a weariness that belonged on a man decades older. "What's your name, kid?" Wyatt asked gently. After what felt like forever, he whispered one word: "Finn." "Finn," Wyatt repeated, taking a careful step closer. "I'm Wyatt." He knelt down slightly, trying to appear less intimidating, his heart aching with a familiar, searing pain at the sight of this young soul alone in the freezing night. "Are you looking for something specific?" Finn's grip on the sandwich tightened, his knuckles white. "Food," he admitted, his voice barely audible above the moan of the wind. The word hit Wyatt like a physical punch to the gut. No one should be searching for food in a dumpster. Not on Christmas Eve. Not ever. "Where are your folks, Finn?" The question seemed to drain whatever color remained in his cheeks. His bottom lip trembled violently as he looked down at the icy ground. I don't have any," he said, his voice cracking with unbearable grief. "Not anymore." Wyatt felt something twist painfully in his chest, a sudden deep awakening, something he hadn't felt in 3 years, something he'd buried so deep he thought it was gone forever, the primal instinct to protect, to care for another soul. 3 years ago, Wyatt Calloway had been a different man. He'd had a partner, Daniel, with a laugh that could fill a stadium, and hands strong enough to break a horse, yet gentle enough to hold his. They'd been building a life on a small plot of land, planning their future, talking about adoption someday. Daniel would trace patterns on Wyatt's back every night as they talked about their dreams, about the beautiful, unconventional family they were building. But life had other plans. Daniel was a rodeo rider, a bull rider with more courage than sense, Wyatt had driven to the county fairgrounds on a hot Saturday in August, his heart full of pride, ready to watch the man he loved do what he did best. He'd been in the stands, cheering with the crowd. Then the world had tilted violently on its axis. A bad fall, a tangled rope, the horrifying final silence that followed the chaos. In the space of an hour, Wyatt had lost everything that mattered. Daniel, their future, his entire world. The man who'd arrived at the rodeo ready to celebrate left as someone else entirely. Broken, empty, and alone. For 3 years, Wyatt had lived like a ghost. He'd sold their land, taken a manager job that required minimal human contact, and built walls around his heart so massive that nothing could scale them. He'd convinced himself he was fine, that existence was enough, that he didn't need anyone. Until now. "What do you mean you don't have any anymore?" Wyatt asks Finn, his voice gentler than it had been in years. Finn's green eyes filled with tears he was desperately trying to hold back. "They found out I was gay." The words were quiet, but held no shame, only profound exhaustion. "My dad went through my phone while I was sleeping and found texts from my boyfriend. He woke me up screaming and yelling. My mom was just crying in the corner. He said he wouldn't have a queer living under his roof, that it was an abomination, that I had chosen this lifestyle, and now I had to live with the consequences." Finn took a shaky breath that hitched in his chest. "I tried to tell them it's not a choice, that I'm still their son, the same person I've always been, but they wouldn't listen. My dad said their house was a house of God, and that there was no room for my sin in it. They gave me an hour to pack a bag." Wyatt's throat constricted painfully. He knew that feeling, the desperate pleading, the denial, the moment when reality crashes down and changes everything. "The friend I was staying with, his parents found out why I was there, and they kicked me out too," Finn whispered. "They said they didn't want me influencing their son, so I've been on my own. I thought maybe if I came back to our old neighborhood, they might have changed their minds. Maybe they'd be worried. But the house is all dark for Christmas." Wyatt felt a cold fury burn alongside the tears behind his own eyes. This kid had been cast out by his own family, abandoned and left to survive on scraps and a sliver of hope just for being who he was. Just as Wyatt had felt abandoned by God and fate after Daniel died. Except Finn was only 18. "Finn," Wyatt said, his voice thick with emotion, "how long have you been out here?" "A few days," he admitted, shrugging his thin shoulders. "I've been sleeping in the bus station when it's open. It's warmer there." A few days. An 18-year-old kid had been surviving on his own for days in the dead of winter. Wyatt stood up slowly, his mind racing, galvanized by a purpose he hadn't felt in years. He pulled out his phone and checked the time. 12:03 a.m., Christmas Day. "Finn, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You don't have to do this alone anymore." The young man looked up at him with confusion and a weariness that broke Wyatt's heart into a million new pieces. Adults had made promises to him before. They'd all been broken. "I know you don't know me," Wyatt said, his voice steady. "And I know you probably don't trust people very much right now. But I promise you this, I am not going anywhere." Something in his voice, maybe the raw reflected honesty of his own pain, made Finn's shoulders relax just slightly. "How about we start by getting you somewhere warm and getting some real food in you?" Finn hesitated, torn between desperation and the survival instinct that screamed not to trust strangers. But the cold was seeping through his tattered sweater, and the mold on the sandwich was undeniable. He finally nodded, a barely perceptible movement. Wyatt's house was modest but clean. He hadn't entertained a guest in 3 years, and the sterility of the space showed it. It was functional but devoid of life. No pictures on the walls, no personal touches, nothing that spoke of the life he'd once imagined building. But as he watched Finn's eyes widen at the simple comfort of central heating, Wyatt saw his own home differently. Through the eyes of someone who had nothing, his quiet, empty nothing suddenly felt like an immense, overwhelming something. "Let me run you a shower," Wyatt said, his voice gentle, heading toward the bathroom. "You must be frozen through." As the water heated up, Wyatt gathered some of his smaller clothes for Finn, a soft cotton t-shirt, clean socks, and flannel pajama pants with a drawstring. While Finn used the shower, probably the first real one he'd had in days, Wyatt heated up leftover chili and made fresh cornbread. Simple food, but warm and filling. When Finn emerged, looking slightly lost in Wyatt's oversized clothes, his hair clean and his cheeks pink from the hot water, he looked like a completely different person. Still thin, still weary, but human again. He ate quietly, carefully, methodically, as if afraid the food might vanish before he finished. Wyatt watched his careful bites and realized he was trying to make it last. "There's more," he said gently. "You can have as much as you want." Finn's eyes instantly filled with tears again. "Really?" As he ate, Wyatt's mind raced. He couldn't just let him go back to the street or to a shelter that might be just as dangerous. He thought about Daniel, about the home they had planned, about the dreams they had of a life built on acceptance and love. Maybe this was why he had survived when Daniel hadn't. Maybe this was his second chance at having a purpose. That night, as Finn slept fitfully on the couch, Wyatt made phone calls. He called Mark, a friend from his past, a lawyer who had helped him sort out Daniel's estate. Despite the late hour, Mark answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Wyatt, is everything okay? It's Christmas morning, man." "Mark, I need to talk." And for the first time in 3 years, he reached out for help. As Wyatt explained the unbelievable situation, he watched Finn toss and turn on the couch. Even in sleep, he couldn't find peace. His young face was creased with worry, and his hands clutched the blanket like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. "This is a lot, Wyatt," Mark said carefully. "I mean, it's a good thing you're doing, but what's your plan here? You can't just keep him." "Why not?" Wyatt asked, his voice firm with a sudden, fierce determination he hadn't felt since Daniel died. "This kid has been failed by everyone who was supposed to protect him. I won't be another person who walks away." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Wyatt, are you sure about this? I mean, it's been 3 years since Daniel, and you've been pretty isolated. Taking in a traumatized kid is going to be—" "I know what it's going to be," Wyatt interrupted, his voice breaking with the truth. "And I know I'm not the same person I was before, but maybe that's exactly why I can help him. We both know what it's like to lose everything. We both know what it's like to be utterly alone." When Wyatt hung up, he found Finn standing silently in the doorway, tears streaming down his face. "You're still here," he whispered, as if he couldn't quite believe his own eyes. "Of course I'm still here," Wyatt said, his heart clenching with immediate love and pain. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere. In the morning and the morning after that, you're not going back to sleeping in bus stations or searching through garbage, not while I'm here." Finn stumbled forward and threw his arms around Wyatt's waist, a desperate grip of relief, and Wyatt felt something crack open in his chest. Something that had been frozen solid for 3 years suddenly began to thaw. The next few weeks passed in a haze of quiet adjustment. There was no bureaucracy, only 2 lonely people learning to share a space. Wyatt moved Finn into the spare bedroom, and they fell into a tentative routine. Wyatt watched as Finn slowly began to relax, to trust that he wouldn't wake up one morning to find his few belongings packed and left on the porch. But healing wasn't a straight line. Some nights, Finn would wake up screaming from nightmares, reliving the moment his father's face hardened with hate. Wyatt would sit with him until the terror passed, making him tea and reminding him softly that he was safe. Other times, Finn would hoard food in his room, terrified it would be taken away. Wyatt would gently explain again and again that the kitchen was always open, that there would always be more. There were moments he would shut down completely, retreating into himself as if bracing for Wyatt to finally abandon him. During those times, Wyatt would simply stay present, fixing dinner, talking quietly about the horses, showing him through steady action rather than anxious words that his commitment was absolute. Wyatt learned things he never thought he would. He learned about modern music, about the anxieties of a generation he didn't understand, and about the quiet, fierce strength it took to survive rejection. But he also learned about joy again. The first time Finn laughed, a real, unburdened laugh at a story Wyatt told about a clumsy calf, Wyatt felt his heart remember what happiness could sound like. When Finn, who'd started helping out at the ranch, successfully calmed a spooked horse with a gentle touch and a soft voice, Wyatt understood what it meant to be proud of someone else's accomplishments. The day Finn started calling him Wyatt instead of Sir, quietly and tentatively, as if testing the word, Wyatt felt a profound warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the fireplace. 6 months after that Christmas Eve, they were sitting on the porch of the main ranch house, watching the sunset paint the vast Colorado sky in shades of impossibly bright orange and purple. Finn had filled out. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by a quiet, determined confidence. He'd enrolled in community college, gotten a part-time job at the local diner, and was saving up for a car. "Have you ever felt like you were just meant to meet someone?" Finn asked quietly, not looking at Wyatt. Wyatt considered the question deeply. "Before I found you, I was just existing, Finn, going through the motions. I convinced myself I was fine, but I wasn't living. I was hiding." He paused, thinking of Daniel, of the life that had been cut short. "When Daniel died, I thought that was it for me. I thought my chance at a life with someone died with him. But maybe this was always part of the plan. Maybe I needed to go through that loss to understand what you were feeling. Maybe I needed to know what it was like to have your whole world disappear so I could help you rebuild yours." Finn finally turned to look at him, his green eyes luminous in the fading light. "You did more than help me rebuild. You gave me a foundation. You gave me back myself." "I thought I was rescuing you that night," Wyatt said, his voice husky with emotion. "But you were rescuing me too. You gave me a reason to live again, a purpose. I was drowning in my grief, and I didn't even realize it until I had someone else to care for, someone who needed me to be strong. You made me want to be the man Daniel always believed I could be." That evening, a quiet, electric tension hung between them, a culmination of months of shared meals, late-night talks, and unspoken feelings that had ripened into something undeniable. Finn came into the living room where Wyatt was reading, holding a small, hand-carved wooden horse. "I made this for you," he said, his hand trembling slightly, "to say thank you for everything." Wyatt took the small horse, its lines smooth and perfect under his calloused fingers. "You don't have to thank me, Finn." "Yes, I do," Finn insisted, his gaze intense, pleading. "Wyatt, you saved my life, not just that first night when I was cold and hungry, but every day since then. You helped me remember what it felt like to be safe. You teach me things, and you listen to me, even when I don't make sense." He took a deep, shaky breath, the admission hovering in the air between them. I know you see me as just a kid you helped, but I don't see you that way. I think I'm falling in love with you." Wyatt felt his knees nearly give out with a sudden mix of profound relief and terrifying, breathtaking joy. He set the horse down carefully and stood up, closing the small, impossible distance between them. He gently cupped Finn's face in his large, rugged hands. "You think I don't know?" he whispered, his voice thick with 3 years of suppressed feeling. "You think I haven't been falling for you every single day for the last 6 months, watching you heal, watching you become this incredible, strong person? Finn, you're not a kid. You are the man who brought my heart back to life." He leaned in and kissed him, a kiss that was both a desperate ending and a beautiful beginning, the end of their loneliness and the beginning of a future neither had dared to dream of. As they stood there, wrapped in an embrace that conveyed 3 years of grief transformed into overwhelming love, Wyatt reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, hungry young man who had been searching through garbage for survival had become the unexpected, brilliant light of his life. And the broken man who had been hiding from the world had found his purpose in loving and protecting him. Sometimes healing comes in the form we least expect. Sometimes the love we need isn't the one we planned, but the one that finds us when we need it most. Wyatt had never been much of a believer in fate or destiny. After Daniel's death, he'd stopped believing in much of anything. But as he held Finn, surrounded by the certainty that they belonged together, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, everything had happened exactly as it was supposed to. 2 broken people had found each other on the coldest, loneliest night of the year, and in choosing to care for each other, they had created a love story built not on shared history, but on a shared understanding of loss and the ferocious, healing power of unconditional love. Wyatt Calloway had stepped out of his house that Christmas Eve thinking he was heading to another night of work. Instead, he'd found his partner, his purpose, his second chance at the love he thought he'd lost forever. And Finn had found his home, not with the family that had abandoned him, but with the man who saw him at his most desperate moment and decided he was worth saving, worth choosing, worth loving for the rest of his life. In the end, that's all any of us really want, to be seen, chosen, and loved unconditionally. Wyatt saw, he chose, he stayed, and that made all the difference. Some people enter our lives to stay for a moment. Others stay forever and change who we become. If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. There are more stories like this waiting for you here. Subscribe to Gay Stories Chronicles for quiet love, second chances, and the stories the world rarely tells. Because everyone deserves to be seen, chosen, and loved.